So we continue the acquiring movement skills process by looking at methods of practice. Now, so far we've looked at the classifications, that would be ChemPod, and how you can or you can't break down certain skills, or whether skills are open or closed, and all of those other continua that we studied in that section. We've looked at how we might present practice or manipulate practice so that a learner has a good chance of gaining the understanding of the skill, so whether it's part or whole or progressive parts, presentation. We've looked at different stages of learning, so what a cognitive learner trying to achieve, or the associative or the autonomous stage of the learner. And now we're looking at methods of practice. Now, specification says that you need to be able to describe the methods of physical practice. So these are physical practice methods, and there are 4 of them: mass, distributed, fixed, varied. You also need to be able to explain how mental practice and rehearsal can help. So we've got 4 physical practice methods and 1 mental practice method. So let's look at the first of the physical ones, massed practice. So if you have things or do things en masse, you do lots of them. So mass practice basically involves repeating a practice or repeating a skill with little or no real recovery between them. So you do lots and lots and lots and lots of repetitions with little or no recovery or rest or discussion in between those practice activities. And this would be suited to things like shooting or dribbling, or maybe, like shuttle runs, where it's all about repetition and doing lots and lots and lots of practice so that you can overlearn a skill. The advantages of mass practice could be that, given you might be under pressure in a football or particularly in something like basketball, and you need to be able to shoot repeatedly under that kind of pressure, that high volume of practice can help that, and it will really help groove a skill. It will require you to be fit, or maybe even will help develop fitness in the performer. And it's particularly suited to discrete skills. So if you imagine a golfer taking a bucket of balls to the driving range and just repeatedly practicing and practicing and practicing and having no break in between. So that's a discrete skill, and obviously can just be practiced repeatedly. It does require the learner to be highly motivated and possibly might be more suited to experienced performers. Some disadvantages, however: if you're doing the same thing repeatedly with no break, you might get bored of it. If you're not a fit person, you might tire, and you should know that when you tire, your performance can go down. And you might just do too much of it. It might be overtraining for you and again affect your motivation. Secondly then, the second physical method of practicing is called distributed. So contrary to the massed practice where you had no rest interval, distributed practices, as you can see here, involves a block of practice. So you might maybe do 10 shots, then have a breather, or 10 sprints, then have a breather, then have another practice interval, then have a breather, and then have another practice interval. So the practice in this type is interspersed with recovery or rest periods. Now, if you are doing very complicated skills, this might be really important. If you have no rests and something's really tough or really complicated, then you might even put the performer at risk. So trampolining, you might practice a certain move, have a breather, come off the trampoline, and then have another go, and then come off and have another go. Or with set plays which are complicated, or tactical drills again which might be complicated. The advantages then, if you have new or complex skills, having that discussion or rest time in between, you can actually go over, give feedback to the performer, or repeat again an explanation. If it's a highly physically demanding activity, you might need the rest and recovery in order to maintain your high quality of performance. It's obviously very essential for dangerous skills. You don't want somebody fatiguing or getting overwhelmed in those, so having a rest period is important. Somebody who's not very fit, you might need the break. The beginners, if they're having a go in an activity, in that rest interval, you might talk to them and help try to guide them, give them feedback on what they can work on. So distributed practice has the break periods there that can be used very constructively. If you're more advanced, it could be demotivating having to stop and start the whole time. You might lose concentration, and if it's a sort of a low behaviour group, they might then be distracted and not perform particularly well. Third physical performance method or practice method is fixed practice. Now, this involves practicing the same skill in the same environment repeatedly. So a free throw in basketball might be a good example, in that you only ever take free throws from the same position at the free throw line, and it makes sense that you would just practice from there. Similarly, with a race, swimming, race dive, possibly high jump, you don't tend to attempt to jump over the bar from different angles. You have your set process, and you just need to practice it from that same situation in that same environment. So fixed practice, the same skill, the same environment. Advantages: if you have closed skills, like I said, the basketball or the dive or a drive from a tee, this might suit this. And if you're in control of it, so it's an internally paced skill, where there's little external environmental influence, then again it's quite appropriate. And if you want to just overlearn and groove, again, free throws, you just need to master it from the free throw line, then fixed practice can be totally appropriate. However, it might be boring if you just practice the same technique from that same position and you're doing the wrong technique. That might be no good, and it doesn't incorporate any decision making. So if the skill that we're talking about, for example, passing in football, and you just practice passing in one situation, when you come across a different situation, you might be thrown and you don't have that decision making process there. So fixed practice is only really suited to certain types of skills. So then finally, we've got varied practice. So this is kind of the opposite to fixed, really. You would practice skills from different or in different environmental situations. So that might be practicing shooting in basketball or football or netball from different angles, or in differing attacking or defending situations, so 3v2, 2v1. And the idea is that you give yourself as many different experiences from as many different environmental situations as you can, so that whatever you come across in your game situation, you're going to have the experience or have been exposed to it, and therefore will cope with it. So passing or shooting in our major games really suits this. The advantages of varied practice then: it suits open skills where you automatically have a changing environment, and it will enable you as a learner, a performer, to develop what we call schema, and we'll come to this in a later topic. But schema involves you just modifying your skills to suit different environments, so it makes you very flexible. It also translates to reality, so you aren't necessarily going to find the same situation in a game. So if you've practiced in lots of different situations in a variety, then you'll be able to face that reality. It will improve your decision making and will keep you quite motivated. However, it can provide what we call increased perceptual load. So it will be more demanding in terms of your thought processes and your decision making. So the beginner, the cognitive learner, might not go straight into a varied practice. You might start them on a fixed practice where they don't have to think about too many other things, and they might work towards varied practice. So as I said, it might be quite confusing for the cognitive learner, but much more appropriate for the associative or autonomous learner. If you're continuing to vary the practice environment, you might reduce the chances of grooving a skill, so discrete skills might be less appropriate for this kind of practice. Lastly then, this mental rehearsal. You basically go through thinking through the skill without physically movement, so you either imagine yourself making the action or completing the skill, or you might even look down upon yourself and see yourself performing the skill. if you go through that process mentally, even though you're not moving, there are lots of benefits. So you might have all know Johnny Wilkinson, when before he kicks for goal, he stands in a certain position and he goes through mental rehearsal. He sees something that will then support him and hopefully help him when he actually does go to physically kick the ball. So the advantages of mental rehearsal then, if you're doing distributed practice, i.e. having a practice period and then having a rest or recovery interval, you could mentally rehearse that skill or that drill in that rest interval before you go on then to do your next practice interval. So it can reinforce mentally all those neural pathways about what you're supposed to be doing. It's a really important way for things like free throws or kicking at goal in rugby or taking a penalty to control your arousal. And what that means is keep you calm, keep you in an appropriate level of readiness. It can help you learn, so it can reduce the learning time. So going through it and getting it clearer, that mental image in your head really helps. And actually, if you are injured, it can go through the process of sending impulses to your muscles, even though they're not contracting, and that will just give you an opportunity to at least do some kind of practice if you're not able to do the full physical practice. However, it's not just something that you can do effectively, in those shooting situations. You do need to practice it and almost mentally rehearsing it. Sometimes people find this really hard to do, and perhaps it's arguable that they don't find any benefit from it. But there's no doubt that certain types of athletes can and do benefit from mental rehearsal. So lastly here's a mark scheme to do with explaining the role of mental rehearsal. So it really helps the performer create a mental image. Beware of these things though, the things that you cannot accept or the examiner would not accept. It's not just Emory or rehearsal. It's the purpose of it is to create a mental picture of the skill or the performer to visualize. So use the phrases the mark scheme asks for. And as a result of this, it will help people understand the requirements. You can help visualize yourself correcting any faults you might be having. It goes through the process of your neural pathways sending impulses down to your muscle, which might make them quicker at doing this and therefore reduce reaction time. You can help focus and concentrate and just attend or select the right things, so you concentrate on the right things. It will help you remember the skill better. You can perhaps help the memory or your recall of this skill. It'll make you confident and feel positive about being able to execute the skill. And as we said, it helps reduce arousal, so it keeps you calm and focused. So there are lots of benefits to mental rehearsal. Make sure you learn these phrases that the mark scheme asks for.